Before we get into today's video, if you're someone who's interested in retro modded consoles like Game Boy SPs, Game Boy Colors, or Game Boy Advances, we have them all at privateclubcollective.com. We even have over 30 t-shirts like this one here, where you can get one for yourself or for a loved one at privateclubcollective.com. Now let's head into the video. There are moments in history when governments face a difficult choice, when war seems inevitable but public support is lacking. What if the solution is deception? In 1962, the United States military drafted a chilling plan, a plan to sacrifice its own citizens, a plan so shocking that even President John F. Kennedy said no. It was called Operation Northwoods. The 1960s was a dangerous time. The Cold War had reached a boiling point. The United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in a global chess match, each side threatening nuclear destruction, but the most immediate threat wasn't across the ocean. It was just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the Cuban government, turning the island into a communist state. The US government saw this as a direct threat. If Cuba aligned with the Soviet Union, nuclear weapons could be placed right on America's doorstep. This could not be allowed. In 1961, the CIA attempted to remove Castro through the Bay of Pigs invasion. The plan was simple: send in trained Cuban exiles, spark an uprising, and take back the country. But it failed miserably. Hundreds of men were killed or captured. The US had been humiliated, and now the military was desperate for a way to justify an all-out war with Cuba. They needed the American people to demand military action, so they came up with a plan, a terrifying plan. March 13th, 1962, a classified meeting deep inside the Pentagon. High-ranking members of the US military gathered around a table, staring at a single document. A document so secret it wouldn't be declassified for nearly 40 years. The proposal? Operation Northwoods, a series of carefully planned false flag attacks. The military's own words: we could develop a Cuban terror campaign in Miami, other Florida cities, and even Washington, D.C. The US government was preparing to stage attacks against its own people and then blame it on Cuba. The document outlined multiple attacks on terror, all meant to manipulate the American public into demanding war. The military proposed hijacking commercial airliners and blaming it on Cuban terrorists. Also, blowing up a US Navy ship, just like the sinking of the USS Maine in 1898, which led to the Spanish-American War. Planting bombs in American cities and shooting at civilians in the streets. The plan even called for fake funerals. The media would report grieving families. The public would cry out for justice, and soon they would demand revenge. But the most disturbing part of the plan, the military wanted to destroy an American passenger jet. They planned to take a real civilian aircraft, secretly replace it with a drone, and then detonate it mid-air. Meanwhile, a pre-recorded distress call would be played over the radio, convincing the world that innocent Americans had been murdered. It was the perfect crime. No bodies, no witnesses, just rage and a war. But then, something happened that wasn't part of the plan. The proposal made its way to President John F. Kennedy, and when he saw it, he was horrified. Kennedy rejected Operation Northwoods immediately. He shut it down, and within months, he began dismantling the CIA's power. Some say this was the moment he signed his own death warrant. Kennedy didn't just kill Operation Northwoods, he fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, the mastermind behind the Bay of Pigs disaster. He cut military funding. He even said he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. To the military, to the intelligence agencies, Kennedy was a problem. A weak leader who wouldn't do what was necessary to protect American power. And then, on November 22nd, 1963, he was gone. Officially, Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman, but the man Kennedy fired, Allen Dulles, was placed in charge of the Warren Commission, the very investigation into Kennedy's death. Was Kennedy killed for refusing to go to war? Was he eliminated by the same forces that created Operation Northwoods? The files were buried. The operation never happened. What if other versions of Northwoods did? Because sometimes the truth isn't what happened. The truth is what we are allowed to know. I would go ahead and like to give my thoughts on this because I think it's very interesting to know the leading days to Kennedy's death. We know he wanted to end nuclear wars by disabling the nuclear heads that America was holding, because if one nation had it, then the rest would want to have it, especially after we had seen the destruction it had caused for World War II and who the victorious ended up being. In addition to that, Eisenhower even said after World War II, the military-industrial complex is the one enemy to the American public, the one industry to keep a watchful eye on. And it's interesting how President Kennedy was always considered the good old boy, and when he took a good old boy stance on Operation Northwoods, he mysteriously was assassinated, and the guy he fired was head of the whole investigation. Very odd to consider that. And it's also odd to consider that another massive US tragedy was 9/11. And 9/11 sounds very similar to how Operation Northwoods would have played out. And it makes you think, were there other hands playing at 9/11 just as they would have played for Operation Northwoods? Now, despite the eerie similarities of how 9/11 played out compared to how Operation Northwoods would have played out, let's look at the CIA's track record, considering the Spanish War with the USS Maine and also the Tonkin incident which got us into Vietnam. It's not hard to believe that the CIA really was behind a project like this or an operation like Northwoods and could have had some kind of handling behind 9/11. It really makes you think, who is on the American public side? If it's not the military-industrial complex or the CIA, who can we trust? And that there is an eerie question that will leave you in a paradox of more. If you like content like this, be sure to like and subscribe and comment what other videos you would like to see in the future. Until next time, thank you for watching.